overall view has always been, how do you figure out how to empower people? I mean, it's fairly simple on one hand. I mean, it was easy to see in Mississippi, for instance, where I worked, how disempowered people were. And the work, whether it was voter registration or whether it was the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, or whether it was the Poor People's Corporation, or whether it was the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union, the work was about facilitating people taking control of their own lives, empowering people. How do you do that? What works? What doesn't work? For instance, for example, what doesn't work, one of the things we hadn't recognized in beginning the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union was that labor was increasingly not essential on plantations. They were becoming mechanized. And if you went on strike, as they did in, say, Greenville, it just facilitated the use of tractors and automatic equipment and cotton picking machines and so forth. So you learn in trying to figure out how to empower people. That's what or certainly I, always kept in front of me, that question. How do you best do that? And by empowering people, it didn't mean me getting a seat on the county board of supervisors. It meant people like Mrs. Hamer and Unita Blackwell and others. How do you get them in those communities empowered to take control of their own lives? I still think that's the work today, although it's a much more complicated work today, because we have the illusion of empowerment in many places, and that shoves us off course a lot of times, many times. But that still, then and now, was what I had saw as the necessity, what I constantly had to keep in front of me as the terrain I was standing on shifted. Because the terrain does shift. When you got a Voting Rights Act in 1964, that's different than the 1962 Mississippi that I first came to as a 19-year-old, no less. So I still think that's where the discussion belongs among today's activists. How now in this transformed community, because the Black community is also much more urban now than it was then, despite some migration back to the South. It's still largely much more an urban community than it was back in the day, in the early 1960s or 50s. So those conversations are what organizers have to keep in front of those. And those are the kinds of conversations we as SNCC veterans try and facilitate with our website and in our face-to-face conversations. I mean, so even in those are the conversations we try and encourage among today's generation, who are the ones who are going to pick up the reins of organizing, who are going to continue this organizing tradition that we all belong to, whatever time period we also belong to. And I don't claim that it's easy or going to be easy, but it's necessary.